Good evening, everyone. My name is Neha Rawal and I'm part of the NASCOM SME team. I welcome you all and thank you for joining us for this session on global recovery from the pandemic, implications for the FX markets. We have with us Ms. Uma Venkatraman, member of the NASCOM SME Council. She holds the position of CEO at Excite Technologies Private Limited. With hands-on experience of over 14 plus years, she has enabled businesses to get the most out of their data. Her personal strengths are in drawing linkages between business issues and data quality, enabling businesses to build sound governance and practices in capturing, cleansing, enriching, and managing data by implementing tools, building teams, and embedding a strong data quality culture. She is also actively involved in speaking and training at various forums to promote awareness of how the data asset can be managed. So, without further ado, I'll now hand over the stage to Ms. Uma and request her to introduce our speakers and lead the session. Over to you, Uma.
Thank you, Neha, for that very nice, lovely introduction. I'm really excited to have you all here and warmly welcome you to what promises to be a very engaging session. This is also the first session in this year under the new SME Council as part of the SME Advantage program, which NASCOM has in joint partnership with ICICI Bank. So as Neha mentioned, this whole session will be on global recovery from the pandemic and implications for the FX markets. NASCOM is proud to have this partnership with ICICI Bank, a leading bank, first digital bank, and one of the finest banks, I would say, in terms of innovation and forward thinking. They have a range of products, leading financial solutions in various areas, personal banking, wealth management, Forex, trade and transaction banking. And they have curated this and created tailor-made solutions for the SME industry in particular. And NASCOM has 2,600 plus members today. And therefore, I think it would be extremely useful and very, very thoughtful of NASCOM to have thought this through. And thanks to ICICI Bank, we are here today. Now, more about this session. This session started actually with the planning stage itself. NASCOM has been planning this since, and it's continuing since the last 1 year. So there has been feedback from members that they want this particular topic to be included. That's how it has started. So two things. One is it's going to give you an insight into the current and future trends in the Forex markets. The second, it is also going to tell you how you can deal with volatile Forex volatility in the markets. So what do we expect in the near future, long-term future, and how to manage it are some of the interesting areas which three eminent panelists from ICICI Bank will be discussing. So you will have access to their expertise, not just today, maybe later on also you can approach them and have your queries sorted out. A little bit about the speakers. So we have three members here. First is Amit Kothari. Welcome, Amit. So Amit is the sector head and sector services group. He's belongs to that. He heads a division of ICICI Bank's wholesale banking group. And in that group, he's particularly responsible for the IT, ITES industries and the new age technology companies, for which they look for providing financial solutions across Forex, transaction banking, trade and trade finance, and hedging as well. Amit is a chartered accountant and he has got more than 16 plus years, 13 of it which has been in ICICI Bank across various segments. So he's going to give us a brief contextual overview to start with. The next person is Mr. Shivam Chakraborty. He's a senior economist with the Economic Research Group at ICICI Bank, and he is going to give the economic outlook. So that promises to be an extremely insightful presentation. And he's also had prior experience with HDFC Bank, ABN AMRO, and more than 15 plus years of experience. The third person we have here is Mr. Anand Pandey, who's the zonal head of the markets group in the South. So he heads the Forex and derivatives sales function in South India. He's a chartered financial analyst and an MBA from the Management Development Institute, and he's got 16 plus years of experience in ICICI Bank. Collectively, they have 50 years all put together. And you can imagine the kind of experience and insights that we'll be able to get in this session. So I look forward to a very, very engaging session. We will take the questions at the end. So we'll wait for this whole thing to go through. It's planned to be in 1 hour, but we can extend it if there are questions. So please post it on your post it in the chat box. I'll be looking out for it. Over to you. Over to you, Amit. Thank you. I request Amit now to make the introductions, provide the initial context.
Hello.
Yeah, Amit, we can hear you. You can go on.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Uma, for your introduction. And there was a bit issue at my hand. Just give me 1 minute. I got logged off. So first of all, let me thanks NASSCOM for giving us this opportunity and selecting ICICI as a partner for this new initiative which they started as SME Advantage Series. This program itself is unique in its sense because it's intent to curate and bring best practices across the various aspects which touches upon to their members on their business aspect. On the finance front, they have chosen ICICI to take care of the various banking needs. And it would be a series where we would be a lot of on various webinars, lot of aspect would be covered. The first topic which has been selected is implication for the forex market. Then if we look at from the current perspective, and specifically after this pandemic, uh, the entire segment, this IT segment, has lead to a digital transformation, and which all we are party to it. I think if we look at our day-to-day journey and the ecosystem which we are getting more and more adaptable to the digital journey. One aspect which if we look at is, and this is also lead to an interconnectivity of the economy across the geography. And today we are well connected with any countries which we can. It was always connected, but the connection has become more profound. And Indian IT companies has been leading this journey, and this has been proven in this pandemic also. And this is the sector which has been least impacted. And if you look at from that perspective, this also lead to volatility because of the I would say only because of the interconnection of this globe. And there are certain activities which, and since we are now billing, more and more billing happens on the various other currency, the volatility is there, which is beyond our control. On banking front at ICICI, we has been always on forefront in making a solution more digital. Uh, and there are various FX solution which Anand would be touching upon. On the FX part, how to get those digital solution at the and on also at the compliance, we have our eSoftFX product, which anyway we would not be covering in this, but it has a detailed presentation which we can cover on that eSoftFX also, which gives the digital compliance a digital shape. And if I have to look it from an SME perspective, one thing which I clearly see, and as a banker, I can share that experience, that one thing which they least, even in this IT companies, they least do is getting themselves digital when it comes to compliances also. And this FX piece, the hedging part of it is something which they hardly do because they treat this as a cost. The way we as a banker and we would be looking at is because there is lot of risks which get associated in case we are not hedging it, because we would not have a predictable cash flow, and it sometimes lead to a large volatility and disruption which can affect the businesses, because if in a small business there is a disruptiveness which come, it have a huge impact. So we as a bank are always advised our clients that they should be doing an FX hedging of it. This not only give them a realistic cash flow position, it also give them to plan their cash flow in more predictable manner. With this, I would now hand over, because Shivam would be taking care on the economic aspect of it and would be taking through the various aspects which need to be and also giving an outlook. I would now hand over to Shivam to take us through the economic outlook.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks so much for the introduction. So I'll just share my presentation. So yeah, so I will touch upon our main sort of what we see, in terms of what is happening in the global economy, global markets, Indian economy, and Indian markets. I will, I hope my presentation is visible.
Yeah, Shivam, it's visible.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
Continue.
Yeah. So if there anything that's not covered here that you would like to discuss, please raise it on the chat session. I'm more than happy to take it up. If there's something you'd like to discuss after that, I'm more than happy to take it up. So I'm just going to give a quick gist. This is broadly the structure of the kind of agenda that we have. We'll first go through the global economy and markets, what we expect, Indian economy, and then we'll give a USD INR our expectations. We'll also provide a more medium-term framework as to what drives the dollar INR, what has historically driven the USD INR over the medium term. So that is again something that we'll examine, and then my colleague Anand will go through the risk management strategies given the views and the volatility that we expect. So just to get quickly started, I think quickly what we see in global in the global economy, global growth expectations. This slide just provides a quick snapshot. And what we've done is we've given provided here 2020 what actually happened. For India, it's fiscal year 21. For India, it's a fiscal year. Then we're looking at 2021, what our forecasts that we had in March, and of course what our forecasts that we had in June. That we revised to. So broadly speaking, in 2020 was a unusual year in the sense that we saw a synchronized global recession. Even during the last, for instance, even during the last financial crisis period, I don't think we witnessed this kind of, capitulation and growth that took place. Global economy overall contracted by 3.6%, and this is probably the worst performance since probably going back to the Great Depression. Each country contracted at a different pace depending on the kind of lockdowns that were imposed. Europe and UK were the worst hit because of the scale of lockdowns, and the fiscal support that was provided was not as significant as, let's say, a country in the US, and that's why the growth hit was a little less than what we saw in Eurozone and UK. China, of course, was the outlier, and that's really because of the fact that it was, although the epicenter of strain, it managed to curtail the spread of the virus most effectively and was able to open up a lot more. India, of course, was hit because of the lockdowns that were imposed as well in that period. Overall, what do we see? We see a sharp pickup in growth in 2021, and we are also fairly optimistic about growth projections in 2022. But our main forecast that we have is that there will be huge divergence between developed market economies that we refer to as DMs and emerging market economies that we refer to as EMs. Why is that? It's very simple. We are in the middle of pandemic. The solution to the pandemic is to bring about a medical solution and create herd immunity to the virus. The most developed economies are actually leading that race as compared to emerging economies, given the higher population penetration, vaccine population penetration. US has been the front runner in that sense. And we've also seen a substantial amount of fiscal support that has been provided in the US. It's been about 25% of GDP. So we've raised our projections a little bit. Europe has opened up a little more than what we thought would happen in March. There are signs that growth is perhaps picking up a little bit. We've raised our projections. UK, again, we've raised our projections, but the reason for raising our projections was really the kind of fiscal support that the government provided was a little more than what we had thought. Japan is probably the worst among the developed economies. It's going through a fourth wave and huge restrictions, so growth is fairly weak. Emerging economies, we've actually lowered our projections and forecasts, and that's really reflecting the spread of the virus, not just in India, countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, South Africa, Brazil. It's pretty rampant. It's pretty. It's a bit of an issue, and the restrictions are in place. Tightening measures are there, and lockdowns, partial lockdowns, regional lockdowns, and so on. So that's why we are lowered our projections and see downside risk to our emerging economies outlook. As far as China is concerned, after recovering in 2020, we think it will be in 2021. Quarter one, we had a blockbuster GDP reading of about 18%, but we think that Chinese growth momentum will go and slowly move back towards its trend level. There is a strong pickup in trade flows. There is a strong pickup in industrial growth, right, that is supporting growth, which will remain in place. Relatively, we've kept our Chinese growth forecast flat, although there has been some signs of some weakening in growth momentum sequentially in May and June. So that's just something to keep in mind. So broadly speaking, a pickup after the worst showing in a long time in 2020, with considerable divergence between emerging markets and developed markets. Why is that? I think this basically summarizes the divergence in a very quick nutshell. So if you look at the chart on the left, what you see out here is the vaccine penetration. You can see most emerging economies, of course, the Middle East and most developed economies have led the race. Emerging economies, Brazil, Malaysia, India, Russia, Indonesia, Philippines, South Africa, they're lagging well behind. We think that full opening up of emerging economies will only probably happen end of 21, end of 22. And of course, another differentiating factor is the kind of fiscal stimulus that has been delivered. And a lot of the fiscal stimulus that has been delivered by developed economies, particularly the US, UK, and Japan and Canada, has been direct cash transfers to households. So once we have, as restrictions get eased, given these direct cash transfers that has happened, there will be a huge pickup in consumption, which is what we are seeing in the US. In the US, it's been phenomenal, 25.5% fiscal stimulus, of which we estimate close to 9 to 10% is in the form of direct cash transfers to households that has been happened. Emerging economies is again, lagging behind. Emerging economies do not have the same kind of fiscal space as advanced economies have. And, and that's really been a bit of a issue. China again leads the pack in terms of stimulus provided among emerging economies, and Europe is again not recovering to the same pace as some of the other economies like US and UK, mainly because its fiscal support, direct fiscal support, has also not been as pronounced as we have seen when comparing US and UK. And just harping on this theme, why we are so optimistic about global growth, even though we are, just recovering from a pandemic, and ideally when you recover from a recession, income levels are hit. But what happened is two key observations. One is, if you look at the chart on the left, what it does emphasize is that this has been primarily a consumption-driven recession, where GDP contraction has been led by sharp fall in consumption. But unlike other recessions, there has not been an income levels have not fallen sharply. Income levels have actually increased. If you look at most advanced economies, countries like US, Australia, UK, you've seen a huge increase in incomes. And because consumers have not been able to go out and spend that money, there's been a huge excess savings that have been built up. So this is the excess savings that have been built up since COVID-19, which has increased by about 12.5% of GDP. So that just shows you the kind of potential in terms of consumer power and consumption power that is in store for 21-22 as we gradually open up. Herd immunity is reached. US is already more or less opened up. UK is poised to open up. Australia is lagging a little behind on the opening up session, but so that will happen. So there is a huge consumption support, and that's why we are somewhat optimistic about growth projections going forward. The byproduct and one of the other important developments on the global side is that while growth momentum has picked up, what we are seeing is also a sharp rise in inflation pressures, global inflation pressures, both in the major economies as well as in the emerging economies has picked up. Some of this has got to do with base effects. That is, last year during the pandemic, there was a sharp fall in inflation rates, reflecting the contraction and virtual standstill of economic activity. So some of it is base effects. Some of it also pertains to the fact that production bottlenecks have emerged because economies are reopening after a very long period of time. So as that is happening, there are some supply side bottlenecks, supply side deliveries. We've spoken to corporates. A lot of corporates are saying that they're facing container issues, in ports and so on. So there's some teething problems as we open up. But I think there are enough to suggest that the pickup in inflation could be more persistent, particularly in a country like US. We're less concerned in, let's say, Europe. But in US and emerging economies like India, there is a huge potential for inflation picking up quite sharply. Several reasons for this. Of course, like I had mentioned, consumption will be fairly robust. Consumption outlook will be very robust. We have a huge quantum of fiscal and monetary stimulus that has been provided. So that in itself creates a huge inflation risk going forward. I'm going to talk a little bit more on the US economy and the Fed, and then I'll get into market expectations in India. But if there are any questions on a specific geography, please put it on the box. Please reach out there. Most certainly can answer it. More specifically, and a very interesting observation that we find is that the US economy is, if you compare the World War II period and what we see in the US economy post-COVID or during the COVID period, there are two key similarities. One is the savings rate during World War II rose up quite sharply. That was because of some degree of caution. Obviously, if there's a war, you will stay at home and not spend. In COVID period, that has been driven by some degree of spending on things like basic medical care, food and beverages, basic industries, right? Consumption in discretionary items like transportation, recreation, clothing, auto purchases fell quite sharply. We've seen a similar trend. I've not put it up here, but if you look at the 2000 consumption pattern of the US, it follows a fairly similar trend to what you see in the right hand side. The net result of high savings, two things happened. One, there was high savings. There was a huge huge fall during the World War II period in discretionary items, right? Was that CPI inflation actually spiked up quite sharply. Why did that happen? Because obviously once World War II ended, the economy opened up, there was a huge buildup in savings that got spent. So there was a huge spike in inflation that you can see. And that inflation spike lasted for about a year and a half. We think that US inflation, the current run rates of about 4.5%, 5%, partly reflect base effects and will probably moderate, but it will remain above the Fed's target of about 2 to 2.5%. So overall, US inflation will pick up. And of course, the other supporting similarity between World War II and COVID-19 is that you had huge fiscal deficits that had got built up. In World War II, it was to fight it was on national defense. In COVID, it's been in the form of direct cash transfers and to support and social sector spending to support households as they have had to battle and weather the COVID storm. So that's just something to keep in mind going forward from a US economy perspective. Why it's important is because what the Fed does is very important from a market perspective. So that is one of the key implications that we have as far as the post-COVID, as we are slowly hopefully getting out of the COVID period. I mean, we'd have to wait and see how herd immunity builds up, whether there are any new mutations that build up, then that will have to be factored in. But right now we're assuming that the pandemic slowly recedes, first in DM, then in EM. So in US, that's something to keep in mind. What does this mean for the Fed? So the Federal Reserve made a very hawkish pivot in its June policy meeting. What was the hawkish pivot? The hawkish pivot was very simple. They signaled to the market, if you look at this table, if you look at right here, previously they've been telling the market that they would keep policy rates at the zero lower bound up to 2023. Now they've signaled that it could go up by 50 basis points in 2023, and there are strong indications that it could actually start in 2022, the rate hiking cycle. We actually think the Fed will move towards normalizing policy. We think the Fed will commence QE tapering by November and terminate its QE program by Q3 2022, and then embark on a rate hiking cycle either Q4 or Q1 of 2023, Q4 2022, Q1 2023. The rate hiking cycle, it might be staggered. The last time we saw it in 2014-18, it was prolonged over a 4-year period. The Fed will take into account financial conditions, market conditions. They will also take into account how the economy is responding to rising interest rates. So it could be a bit staggered, but the Fed's, the US monetary policy cycle is definitely turning. What does this mean for the dollar? So this slide basically tries to capture two key aspects of what drives the dollar. One is it is a safe haven currency. That is, whenever there are concerns about growth, global growth in particular, investors turn to the safety of US fixed income securities. So the dollar typically has an inverse relationship with global growth, which is what this catapult here picks up. Number two is the return on holding US fixed income and holding US assets. If you look at the developed market currencies and Asia currencies, which is the two graphs on the right-hand side, there is a strong correlation between the interest rate trajectory and how the dollar moves with the respective currencies. So as we go out of the global, so two things have happened. We've been through 3 phases as far as COVID is concerned. The first phase was that of immediate fear, which was March, Feb to May 2020, where the dollar rallied sharply. Then as the Fed committed to keeping rates low and economic activity resumed, the dollar weakened from June to December 2020. Then there was the Biden stimulus package and expectations that US will lead the global recovery. Fed will have to start tightening a lot earlier than previously assumed. So that resulted in a dollar upside starting from March 2021 and has continued. So we are actually bullish on the dollar globally. We think that expectations of US growth being higher, not just US growth, specifically US rates being higher, will mean that will be that will keep the dollar supported over the medium term. We see this continuing into 21 and the first half of 2022. Second half of 2022, we see the dollar actually flattening out. There could be some concerns about US growth that could emerge, but broadly we see a gradual sort of move higher in the dollar. More upside is likely once the Fed actually begins its taper and announces a more aggressive rate hiking cycle, which could come later in 21. What does this mean for the dollar? Where do we see the dollar? For the euro, we see it going to 1.15, 1.16 range by first half of next year. The pound, we see it stabilizing around 1.35, 1.36. Yen is probably in 110, 112, and possibly 114 going into next year. CNY is a slightly better currency, and that's more to do with the fact that it's the Chinese government is opening up the financial markets, and that is creating a strong fund flows into China. So we see the 6.4, 6.6 range remaining in place for some time. CNY will probably keep in mind. So that broadly concludes the global section and what we expect. Getting into India, right? A quick review of fiscal year 21. We underwent our worst performance in a very long time in quarter one, fiscal year 21, that's April to June. And this was really a function of the kind of lockdowns that were imposed in India. Then as the economy gradually opened up, restrictions were eased. We saw gradual recovery taking hold, quarter two, quarter three, quarter four. Agriculture was, of course, a little more immune to, the COVID pickup, because the restrictions in rural economy was not as severe as in the urban economy, and the spread had been curtailed, had not really reached rural economy to that degree. Industrial sector picked up a lot more faster than the service sector. That's really because there was a restocking cycle, because of lockdowns, there had to be inventory that had to be rebuilt. And there was also fairly robust global trade because US and Europe had started showing signs of picking up. Services lagging behind is to be expected. There will always be a asymmetric hit in terms of high contact service sectors. So that's really what gets reflected in the numbers. As far as the global trends are concerned, this also shows up in several developed market economies in terms of the trend, sector-wise trend. Key observation is that the pace of contraction in quarter one in India was got to do with the kind of lockdowns that were imposed. We had the most stringent lockdowns, and that's why we had the bigger hit, both the formal and informal sector. Going later on in the year, formal sector was able to recover, informal sector still remained fairly weak. Going into 2021, coming into fiscal year 22, I think the Jan, February looked very different to what it is now. The kind of second wave that we saw was unanticipated. A few things to keep in mind. One is we are obviously following the global COVID curve by about 3 to 4 months. We're 3 to 4 months lagging the global COVID curve. The 4 times in each of the major geographies, the 4 times the peak of the second wave tends to be about 4 to 5 times the peak of the first wave, which is what we saw in India. Key observation is that really what happens going forward, the recovery pattern right now comes really down to the kind of vaccination program that is implemented. Overall, we could go 2 ways. One is the European US way, where vaccine was loaded, supply was created, and that allowed economy to reopen, growth. The COVID curve fell quite sharply. Or we go the Europe way and Japan way, where there has been mini waves. You've seen a first wave, second wave, third wave. Japan is now seeing a 4th wave because vaccination pace is slightly slower. What we've done also is on the right-hand side chart, we basically plotted something that we refer to as it shows you the kind of restrictions that in terms of curbing mobility. Prior in a level of 100 implies maximum, a level of 0 implies minimum. So as you can see, in response to the first wave, our overall whereas in the second wave, it has been a little more moderate, 81.9, because we've not had a national lockdown. So the net hit on growth has not been as severe as we saw in the first wave. Within the bank, we have produced something that we refer to as the ultra high frequency index, which basically tracks how economic indicators that are released on a very high frequency basis are performing. So this includes things mobility, labor markets, e-way bill, revenues, and so on, right? And then what we've done is we've looked at a base case of looking at it at what that average was. A pre-COVID level average, we've taken that and assumed to 100, which is January. The index performs relative to that base case. So you can see in response to the first lockdown, the index plummeted from 100 to 41. Then there was a gradual reopening. It fell higher. Then this was when the first wave infections had fallen sharply. And this was the response to the second wave. Few things to keep in mind. Yes, economic activity fell much below the pre-COVID level, but it actually bottomed out a lot higher than what we saw during the first wave. So year on year, there's actually a jump or an increase, although it's happening over a very low base. Few things to keep in mind. Industrial sector growth was not as badly hit as we saw during the first wave. Most of the hit has happened in high contact service sectors, which gets reflected in the mobility index. As restrictions have been eased and service and mobility has picked up, the index is gradually moving higher. It's currently at 93.5. This is one thing to keep in mind. This is a proxy for economic activity. This is not a proxy for GDP growth. So you can't look at this and say GDP growth it's gone back to the GDP growth level. That's not the case. This is just level of economic activity happening on a weekly basis as captured by the index. So overall, it shows you that and we are on a slight recovery trend. Going forward, what we expect is that ultimately it will be the vaccination pace that will matter. Prior to the second wave, we had a growth forecast of 11%. We estimate that most of the hit happened in high contact service sectors, as our index points out. And subsequently, we've lowered our growth forecast to 9 to 9.5%. There are downside risks. We'll have to keep monitoring on the ground information and how it pans out. The concern, of course, is that the infections have also spread to rural India, and wait to watch, see how it pans out. Our forecasts do not include a hit from the third wave. If there's a third wave, then it's quite possible that our growth projections will have to get revised lower because further lockdowns might be initiated. Few things to keep in mind is whenever we get out of the pandemic, there are very strong structural supports in place, such as the PLI scheme to drive exports higher, government's focus on infrastructure spending, and a very favorable monetary environment that the RBI has at this point in time. So again, a lot will depend on the vaccination and when we reach that herd immunity threshold where activity can resume like we are seeing in US. It's still about 4-5 months lagging on that front. As far as fiscal policy is concerned, I don't want to go into too much detail. Our base case is that fiscal slippage will be about 2.6% of GDP year, as what we saw last year, mainly because growth economic activity has not been badly hit. So revenue will not be as also have there crossed some slippage in terms of the disinvestment target, but overall a slightly modest fiscal deterioration in the fiscal position. There are more details specifically on the budget and the fiscal policy. Because it goes into a sort of story and tailspin altogether given the time. Yeah. Also, as far as concerned, what we expect is that our focus will remain on growth. We don't see the RBI changing it only if they have signs that recovery is a normal policy. In our base case, we assume it will start in December 2021. But if we have a third wave and more lockdowns are initiated as well, and RBI will likely continue with its unconditional easing of the SAP and OMOs, easing that the RBI is also doing. We think the RBI will continue that for most of this year, right? So that basically gives you our Indian economy into in USD INR projection. So basically, as far as USD INR is concerned, one thing to keep in mind is that fiscal year 21 was a very unusual year for India, and basically because the current account slipped from deficit the previous year to a surplus. That slip really happened because imports fell sharply, economic activity contracted at a very sharp pace, and at the same time, because of the Fed's policy of maintaining a zero interest and flooding the market with dollar liquidity, FPI flows remained fairly robust. So what we had was a very favorable balance of payments position. The only reason why the USD INR pair did not fall sharply lower was because of RBI intervention. But if RBI had not intervened, dollar INR would have probably gone to the 70 mark by now. Going into fiscal year 22, from a balance of payments perspective, few things to keep in mind. One is we see the current account going back into deficit. This really reflects a resumption in economic activity. Oil prices are also much higher than what we saw last year. So that means that your imports go slightly higher. And at the same time, portfolio investments moderate, although FDI flows remain fairly strong. Portfolio investments moderate, and that means that your overall balance of payments position comes down a bit, but it is still at a fairly comfortable level. And would not suggest that extreme depreciation is likely, but it's definitely a bit lower. And the fact that the current account slips back into deficit means that there's incrementally more pressure on the USD-INR pair. What I also want to do is just provide a quick snapshot on what drives the INR. So this is specifically looking at the pre-COVID period. What we've done is we've looked at the average USD-INR. We've created a slight heat map. And we looked at the higher change in average level of USD-INR pair. If you look at this change in USD-INR pair out here, so a higher percentage change, that is increase implies depreciation, whereas if USD-INR pair falls, it implies appreciation. So a few things to keep in mind as far as the INR is concerned is that historically depreciation has more or less been the norm. It's only in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years over the last 15 years or last 15 to 16 years where we've seen an appreciation bias. Of course, it's driven by several factors. One is the current account deficit, which can reach extreme levels. The other is if CPI inflation rises very sharply, right? But key observations that I want to emphasize, one is appreciation is rare on any period where the INR has appreciated. So if you look at this period, it has been followed by a very rapid depreciation. So you see INR appreciated here, right? There was depreciation. Appreciated here, there was sharp depreciation the next 2 years. Appreciated, there was sharp depreciation. So it is always better to be prepared for depreciation than appreciation, right? Years in which, and of course, what matters is the current account. But there have been periods where the current account has been actually, like if you look at 2013-14, the current account has been fairly small, has actually fallen, but capital flows fell quite sharply because of the tapering episode, right? And that meant that INR depreciation sort of picked up quite sharply. So it's not just looking at the current account, you have to look at both the current account and the capital account. And the extreme pressure, like for instance, if you look at the extreme depreciation pressure of 2012-13, really came about because of the kind of fiscal policy that we saw. Because there was huge fiscal slippage, most of it was in revenue. Inflation picked up quite sharply in this period. And as inflation picked up, that really translated, and current account deficit picked up as well. That translated into a sharp depreciation episode in USD-INR pair. We also find that GDP growth does not play that big a role in terms of driving INR. It's basically the current account, capital flows, and CPI inflation. Now, one of the things that we get asked is why CPI inflation? So, historically, if you do this, and we've done a lot of internal studies on what drives the INR, we find that the INR moves in sync historically with what the inflation differential suggests between India and the US. Why is that? It's very simple, right? In India, we have a competitiveness problem. And that shows up in the fact that we have a very high RER. So basically, because of our competitiveness problem, because basically we are a supply constrained economy, our demand exceeds supply. So with demand exceeding supply, we have a higher inflation rate, and that manifests into current account deficit. So every year, to maintain our competitiveness with the rest of the world, we have to depreciate by a certain quantum. And historically, that has always, if you look at it, it has always moved in sync with inflation differential. So this chart here emphasizes that. There have been periods where there can be a break in the short term, which is basically the idea of showing this chart from Jan 13 to July 2019 is just to show this. So you can see that this is the India-US CPI inflation differential. There have been deviations upside, downside, but broadly it follows this path. So if you assume that India's inflation structurally will be higher than the US, notwithstanding the inflation you're seeing in the US, which is partly driven by base effects and some of it will moderate, historically, it's better to assume a depreciation bias. But what we think is that, after the appreciation that we've seen in fiscal year 21, if you look at the balance of payments position, and if you look at the inflation differentials for 2021 between India and US, they're not as severe as what they have been in the past. Right? US inflation will average about 3.5. India inflation will be about 5.5, as opposed to in the past, US inflation has averaged 1.5, has averaged about 5. So the pace of depreciation will be fairly modest. If I look at the balance of payments figures, just to illustrate this point, if you look at the ratio of the current account to the FDI flow, right? So how you try and understand how much of depreciation momentum is in a currency, particularly emerging market currency, is you look at the ratio of the FDI to current account. As long as that is in surplus, it basically implies that the net depreciation from portfolio outflows is a lot more modest than what would have been the case if the current account exceeded FDI flows. So the momentum of depreciation may not be as aggressive or severe as we have seen, let's say in 2013 or 2018 when the Fed tightened policy aggressively. But the bottom line is, with Fed tightening policy, with the current account expected to shift back from surplus to deficit, there will be an inherent dollar demand that will pick up in the country, and therefore it's better to expect depreciation. We think it will be very gradual in fiscal year 22 and perhaps pick up a little more in fiscal year 23. We have a forecast of about 73, 75 for the first half of fiscal year 22 and 74.52 and 76.52 the second half. As far as bond markets are concerned, we think an average of about 6 to 6.5% is likely. RBI keeping a monetary accommodation and with its GSAP program will limit sharp upside. But as soon as RBI starts to normalize policy, bond yields will likely move higher, which is more a story of towards the end of this fiscal year or going into next fiscal year, where we really see bond yields move sharply higher. So in a nutshell, that's really what we see from the economy side. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Anand. Yeah, Anand, please.
Yeah, thanks, Shivam. That was really insightful. So Shivam, can I request you? I will share my screen and take over the presentation. So if you can, yeah, thank you.
Sure. Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. Sure, go ahead.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So I will quickly go on the risk management policies. Now, before going into the risk management, policy and a brief perspective about risk management policy, I just want to highlight briefly about ICICI Bank Treasury. While you all know about ICICI Bank, in terms of treasury, we are one of the largest player in INR FX and derivative market. We are also one of the largest book runner. And when I'm saying book runner, it gives us that much more efficiency in quoting forwards and derivatives. We are also one of the leading arranger and market maker in fixed income market. We have a very strong reach, not only in India, but across important trading locations like Hong Kong, Singapore, US, UK, Dubai, and Toronto. We are also ably supported by more than 300 skilled and specialists who are client representatives across all geographies, who are there to help you all in working with your risk management policies and executing hedging transactions as per your requirement. Research, I don't need to speak to. You have heard Shivam. It is one of our pillars for treasury. We are also one of the pioneers in treasury technology with customized workflow solution. I will also take you through some of the treasury offerings in the digital channels, which definitely will help you in optimizing the operational convenience for you all. So our capabilities have also been regularly recognized, and these awards and accolades represent the kind of capabilities that we have built up over the year, be it FX House of the Year or Structured Product House or Best Foreign Exchange Provider. Across various years, we have been regularly recognized for our specialization on the treasury side. Our economic research group, which Shivam represent, has been one of the pillars for treasury. The team comes out with regular research reports, not only on the markets, but thematic reports on the macro aspects, special events like FOMC, RBI policy. The team also does regular webinars for major event with corporate clients and also, the physical interactions. Shivam and the team has come out with proprietary indices, which are mentioned on the screen. The UFI index, which basically is a lead indicator for economy resumption. The IDAT index, which shows the strength of the economic recovery. And I4 markets index, which again basically is a lead indicator for business activity. I would urge you all to visit our economic research website, wherein you will find lot many more updates and much more information. Now going into the risk management policy. So I think Shivam also showcased one chart. You would have seen the way USD INR has moved over the period of time. Now, obviously here it is a bit more exaggerated because I have taken a annual low and high number. And even if you look at only last 5 years, we have seen dollar rupee movement within 4% zone and a zone of 14%. So the currency pair has a lot of volatility across various years. Now, on the top of that, the dollar rupee market is affected by various parameters. It's not only the economics, which is like balance of payment or the monetary policy or the fiscal policy. It also gets affected because of the political factors, the technical factors, the speculation, and the flows, the strength of the economy. So considering all those factors, the corporate treasurers or CFOs, they typically face the risk management dilemma, right from what underlying to hedge, when to hedge, which product to be used for hedging, what tenor we need to hedge. So there are a lot of questions. And over the period basis, our experience, what we have seen is typically a corporate risk management policy works around these questions. They try to identify the risk, they try to look at their underlying, the risk appetite internally, and the market outlook, and basis that a risk management policy has been gets designed. And in the end, every risk management policy that we have seen finally focuses on two important aspects. First aspect, certainty of cash flows, which Amit in the beginning also highlighted, that a corporate should have a visibility of a cash flow irrespective of the exchange rate movements in the market. And a second aspect is protecting the downside. At the same time, if there are any opportunities in terms of rupee depreciation, how can a corporate capture those opportunities so that the bottom line can be increased basis the market movement? So there are various tools which are used by the corporate for depending on their risk management policies. And now when I'm looking at these hedging tools, I have, for simplicity, bucketed them in 4 basic segments. So in basic hedging, forward is the most simplest product, widely used by a lot of corporates. Many exporters, we have seen, they also use export finance like PCFC or FCTLs in terms of borrowing to manage hedging of their receivables. Corporates who have a view on the market and they want to protect their downside, they also use plain vanilla option, which are nothing but an insurance product. We have seen a lot of sophisticated treasuries who have a specialized treasury desk. They use structured products like range forwards, Seagulls. These are the treasuries which takes views on the market. They change their products depending on the market movement and depending on their underlying requirements. And then the fourth class of hedging tools is basically on the balance sheet hedging, which is basically on the currency hedges, which is currency swap, and interest rate hedges, which are on the interest rate swaps. These are the products which are typically used for hedging of your liabilities, like your ECBs or your FCTL loans. In this session, considering the requirement, we will be focusing more on the first 2 hedging tools, which is forwards and the vanilla options. So as I mentioned, forward is the simplest hedging tool. It is nothing but an agreement to buy or sell a currency at a fixed price. So in the example which is given on the screen, and this is just a hypothetical example, considering a spot rate at 74.50, for a 6-month tenor, an exporter can lock in their receivables at a rate of 76. So whether market is at a 74 or whether market is at a 78 on the maturity date, the receivables will get converted at a rate of 76 for the exporter. So that takes care of the certainty of the cash flows. You have a visibility of the cash flows that will be arriving at the end of 6 months by entering into a forward contract. The biggest advantage of forward contract, and because of which they are quite popular and widely used, is the flexibility. You can customize the notional amount. If your receivable is $355,000, you can enter into a forward contract for $355,000. If your maturity date is 24th December 2021, you can enter for a contract for 24th December. So you can exactly match the forward contract with your requirements. Operationally, you can also use time option, wherein you can get a 30 days window period to utilize the forward contract. And on maturity of the forward contract, your receivables will get straight away converted at an agreed rate. So these are major benefits of the forward, because of which it is widely used for hedging. One of the so-called disadvantage of forward is the feeling of opportunity loss. So if you enter into a forward contract at 76, but by the maturity period, if rupee depreciates towards the level of 78, an exporter can get a feeling of a opportunity loss of converting the receivable at a higher rate. To take care of such kind of a dilemma, there are option contracts. So as the name suggests, an option is basically a right for an exporter or an importer to buy or sell currency at a specific strike price. So in this particular example, if an exporter enters into an option contract for the strike price of 76, the exporter has a right to sell dollar at 76 on maturity date. So on the maturity date, if the dollar rupee is less than 76, the exporter will use the contract and convert the receivable at 76. However, if the market is higher, if rupee has depreciated, and if let's say rupee is trading at a level of 78, exporter will convert the receivable at a higher market rate, thereby using the upside. And hence, option contract is nothing but an insurance for an exporter. In this particular case, the insurance is at a level of 76. And obviously for an insurance, you need to pay the premium. In option contracts, the premium needs to be paid upfront. In this particular example, the premium cost for this particular product is ₹1.30 per dollar, which needs to be paid upfront. In option also, you have a flexibility to customize the notional. You can also customize the strike price, and accordingly the premium amount will get adjusted. So for example, instead of 76, if you want your worst case to be protected at a rate of 75, you can buy an option with a strike price of 75, wherein the premium amount will accordingly change. I will also share with you all a quick payoff scenario for various USD INR rate. So on a maturity date, if dollar rupee rate is between 75 to 78, whatever the rate is, in case the exporter has kept the receivables unhedged, obviously the dollars will get converted at a rate whichever is the market rate. If an exporter has entered into a forward contract, then the realization is fixed at 76, irrespective of the market rate. Whether market is at 75 or 78, the realization is fixed at a rate of 76. If an exporter buys an option at 76, then as long as market is below 76, you will buy it at 70, you will convert your receivable at 76. For rupee depreciation more than 76, an exporter will enjoy the depreciation benefit. Obviously, there is a cost which I have mentioned associated with buying a put option. So these are some of the tools which are used by corporates regularly, depending on their risk management policies and depending on their views on the market. Corporates also use these products, depending on the hedge ratios. You can also look at partial hedging through forwards, partial hedging through option contracts. You can also look at keeping some portion of the exposures open depending on your requirement. I will also quickly touch base on some of the regulations which RBI has eased a lot in the last couple of years. So earlier, for every hedging that was done on the basis of underlying or past performance, there was a requirement of providing statutory auditor certificate on an annual basis. That requirement is now waived off. Further, when you are booking the transactions on the underlying basis, or in the current regulation, it is called under the contractual exposure basis, up to a hedging of $10 million, you corporate need not submit the underlying to the bank. And the third point is quite relevant for IT companies. Typically, the IT companies, MNC IT companies having treasury centers at overseas location. Your centralized treasury centers can also execute hedges directly with the banks in India. There is also an provision to hedge exposures which are anticipated. Such exposures can be hedged with the bank. The exporters need to evidence the eventual forex cash flow on the maturity for hedges done on the anticipated basis. Third important aspect, which is again important for the offshore location, is the Indian banks are allowed to offer non-deliverable products to the corporates through their offshore locations. So if you have an offshore entity, let's say an entity based in Singapore or Hong Kong, we can offer NDF product to those entities for hedging the INR exposure. So these are some of the important ease of hedging which are done by the regulator. I will also quickly touch base on some of the digital solutions, and then we can take question answers from all of you. So some of the key digital solutions, predominantly from treasury perspective, are highlighted in this slide. So iTreasury is our flagship product, which is basically a treasury dashboard. So for all CFOs and corporate treasurers, this dashboard showcases all the requirements of treasury, right from a confirmation of the transaction to the cash flows of the transactions that you have entered at a future date, your history of the transaction, your mark to market of the transactions, research reports, everything is published on the treasury dashboard on a real-time basis. We also have launched EasySign, which basically helps corporate for digital onboarding. You just need to submit all the documents digitally and start transactions with the bank. I have already mentioned about our economic research portal. Another key product is integrated workflow, which is basically targeted for all the exporters. Using this platform, any exporter can log in through the corporate internet banking and immediately convert their forex receivable and receive an instant INR credit. So this product has been quite widely used by a lot of exporters, and they are getting immediate INR credit to their account. Another product is an online forward confirmation, which basically helps you to accept any hedges that you have done through forward. The confirmation of that forward can be accepted online. It will also show all the historical deal details. So these are some of the treasury digital solutions which have been being widely used by a lot of corporate clients. We have seen they are helping the clients in their operational requirements and bringing in a lot more efficiencies. We have a lot of other products on the transaction banking side, like eSoftex, which Amit has mentioned, which is typically designed for software companies, trade online product, which take care of all the transaction banking requirements online. All such products we will take a separate session in our next webinar. So this was more about the economic view, the various hedging philosophies, and some of the basic hedging tools which are used by corporates. Uh, Thanks a lot for all your participation. I will open this forum for any question and answers.
Yeah, Anand, there is a question.
Yeah, please.
This question is from Purnima. She's asking that she first of all thanked you for all the insights. And she's asking that the cost of options is so high that it does not make any sense to go in for them. So what would be your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so typically the observation is correct. So that's why I mentioned the two basic products. And Purnima, when you are looking at options are typically used more as an insurance product by corporates when they see a lot of volatility in the dollar rupee rate with a depreciation bias. So in the case that I have mentioned, if actually a corporate expects rupee to depreciate towards a level of 78, 79, but at the same time, the corporate doesn't want the exposure to be totally open to the market, it is a good idea to just buy an insurance for the product. Again, the strike price that you decide will also impact your option premium. So I had showcased an option wherein the strike price was closer to the forward. You can always select a strike price which is closer toward the spot rate, and accordingly your option premium will be lower. Considering the current audience, I have seen lot of exporters who typically budget a exchange rate for their annual budgeting exercise. They use option contracts to protect their budgeted rates. So that is about the option. I hope I have answered the question.
Purnima, I hope you got your answer. There are two more questions, Anand. So it's either up to you or Shivam to answer. So the first question is, can corporates have a own demat and hedge against the USD volatility? That's the first question by Shri Anand.
Sorry, so I'm not clear about the question.
The question is, can corporates have a own demat and hedge against the USD volatility?
Okay, so if I have understood the question correctly, in India, because rupee is not fully convertible, all transactions involving rupee have to be settled through a AD bank. And hence, in all such cases, the transactions have to be necessarily done with a bank, whether it is buying or selling dollar in a spot rate or hedging a transaction with a with any of the AD bank. And because of that reason, there is no demat kind of a requirement. You just need to engage with the banker and accordingly choose a product which is suitable to you.
Right. So Shri Anant clarifies, he meant that, they can buy the options, but you have answered it, I think.
Yeah.
They can buy the options themselves. You have just answered, you have to go through the bank. So he just clarified his own question. So the next question is from Vinay Agarwal. How does PCFC help in hedging the exposure?
Correct. So typically PCFC and that we would be anyway, as a product covering in detail in one of our future webinars, wherein we may take care of the various working capital tools and the transaction banking products. But to just give a gist of PCFC, PCFC is nothing but an export finance, which gives you a immediate conversion to rupee at a current date, and the liability stands in dollar term. So for example, if a corporate has a $1 million order in hand, wherein the dollars are expected to be received at the end of 6 months, corporate can come to a bank if they have a credit limit and banks have sanctioned the PCFC limit. They can take the PCFC disbursement through which the dollars will get converted at a current exchange rate, and the liability will be in dollar terms for a corporate for the 6 months. Now, at the end of 6 months, corporate will receive the $1 million from their export order, and this $1 million will be given to the bank which has provided PCFC, so that the PCFC liability gets settled off. Thereby, corporate is immune to any exchange rate risk. So this is how typically a PCFC or a FCTL works for a corporate.
So Anand, let me add one aspect to it.
Yeah.
The gentleman who have asked on this conversion. Typically, one thing which we have to understand, that hedging is not something which you would gain. Hedging is there as an insurance, because when you sell, if leave apart anything, if there is a normal sale in an Indian rupee, you know what is the currency and amount which you would receive. So from an accounting perspective, you need to know at what rate you would do that accounting entry, which is a conversion. So today, if I've done 1,000 rupee sales, I need to have a conversion factor, which can be anything, and we should be sure of it, that is the amount which we are likely to receive. That is where the accounting closure and the profitability from your core business get established. Now, what PCFC does, and as Anand has already explained in so elaborately and detail, that when that 1,000 rupee sale has $1,000 sale has happened, by doing PCFC, what actually you are doing, you are actually paying that premium, which would, this is nothing but a premium, but that is what the cost, which is the interest cost of that PCFC, is nothing but the insurance which you are paying, which is in form of an interest over the utilization period for which you would be getting that dollar from that bank at the rate, and you are getting that money on that same day on that spot rate, and that is the conversion rate in order to identify what is the revenue booking you would be do on your accounting books. At the end of the cycle, when you are actually receiving the receipt from your customer, you are just knocking it off. In case there is a difference, it just goes to on the interest side. So this interest component is typically the cost of option or other forward cost which you would have otherwise done if this PCFC you would not have taken. So PCFC is a variant of forward and option. Only thing is now the payout actually happening on an interest side. To be more elaborate on that.
I hope, Vinay, that answered your question. Are there any more questions here? So while we wait for a question, I have a question actually. This is to Shivom. So you expressed that the depreciation is not expected to be too much over the next 2 years. You said some 74, 76 rupees.
This year.
Yeah, this year. So, and even considering that, so for an SME who might have a 1-year, contract with a customer, or they have a smaller value or higher value, at what, given that the, volatility is not, I don't know what is the expected volatility. You only mentioned about the rupee rate. So what do you think they should really be going in for hedging or anything over the next year? Would you expect a lot of volatility?
So yes, no, there will be a lot of volatility, but if you look at the kind of volatility that we have seen in the last year or so, over fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 22, has been a bit more limited, because RBI has been there and they have smoothened out the volatility. When there was a sharp appreciation bias that was emerging last year, RBI intervened fairly aggressively and smoothened that out. Even now, they have been fairly aggressive in smoothing out the volatility. So one of the differences that you have a RBI central bank, which has sharp amount of forex reserves at its disposal, right? And they're going to use that to smoothen out that volatility. So there will be, there will be periods, particularly when the Fed moves towards normalizing policy, there will be periods where you could see a sharp movement, but it may not be the extreme kind of depreciation. So if you remember in 2013, the INR went from 60 to 68 within within 2 weeks. In 2018, it went from a 70 to 76, 77 level within a very short period of time. So that kind of volatility may not happen, but yes, there will be intraday volatility, but may not be as severe as what we've seen during those periods. Second thing is, as far as guidance for what kind of products to take from a research side, I think what our main message is that the INR is more of a depreciating currency. So you need to position for that. It is just going through a period of more minor depreciation because the current account is not as wide as what we've seen in the past. Going into fiscal year 23, it's quite possible that if economic activity resumes at a fast pace, current account rises, capital flows remain fairly weak, then you could see a sharp kind of move in USD INR pair. So I think it's better to be positioned for a depreciation bias. It could be modest over the next 6 to 9 months, but then it could accelerate going to fiscal year 23, which I didn't put up, a forecast I didn't put up. But that's the kind of guidance that we did. In terms of products, I think Anand would be the better person to talk about in terms of products. So, yeah.
All right. So Anand, is there any specific products for the SME sector? Because when you mentioned corporates in your presentation, I was thinking SME. So do you see any difference in the way you would approach and assist SMEs?
Uma, thanks. That was quite relevant. So when I was speaking about corporates, I was specifically focusing more on the SME, and that's why in the presentation I had bifurcated the hedging tools in 4 different buckets. And whether it is a exposure of $1 lakh or $1 million or $10 million, in majority of the treasuries I have seen, forwards and basic options are the key tools that are being used by corporates, because they serve 2 different purposes. One, about the certainty of cash flows, and second, a protection or a insurance. The the third product tool, which is about the structured products, is being used by very small set of corporates who have a dedicated treasury setup, and their treasury is more like a profit center. So the forwards and option is the product which is being used by most of the exporters, and that is the product set which is quite relevant for our audience as well.
Uma,
Thank you very much.
I can add upon this.
Yeah. Please do.
So Uma, if you ask me, typically on the FX side, there are only 2 products, which is option and forwards, and then there are multiple option which is more structured in it, as Anand said, Seagull. From an SME perspective, a company which have say 50 crore of turnover or a 25 crore of a turnover, what is more critical is the certainty of the flows which they are likely to receive. That is more critical. And in case there is uncertainty, say for example, if the 10% swing which happened and that $10,000 which is coming, that would eat away his entire profit. What is more critical, and that is why we have been saying, in case you have a regular hedging policies in place, you may end up at a 3% or a 4% cost on an annualized basis. Because if your revenue stream is clear, you can manage your cost. The unfortunate part is that hedging is looked as a cost structure, whereas it's inbuilt in your part of your costing. If you are not doing a costing, when you are doing an intercurrency, that is where you are exposing your small business to large risk, which sometimes, in case of those huge fluctuation which may happen on that short 15 days time, the business may get into a close. So that is very critical. On an overall basis, on a longer term, the hedging cost would always remain whatever the depreciation is, that 4-5%. That would be the hedging cost on an annualized basis.
Right. But okay, thank you very much. I just have one more question. If after that, if there are any more questions, if your IT project is say a year or 2 years, like in mutual funds, they say wait for 2 years, the highs will, offset the lows. Or if you had a 2-month IT project where your cash flows are all coming in 1 month, would hedging be better if it's a short-term project versus a long-term where the highs would balance the lows?
So again, Uma, I would then Anand can, if the same question remain, when is I'm likely to get that flow? When you say my IT project is 3 years, do I am getting an advance against that project after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and I have a cost to settle off. So if I would have been a businessman, and I'm doing a contract, in my gross margin which I want to get from this, say that is 20%. Given all the assumption on all the other costs remaining constant, this is I would do, because I have already said this is the number of employees I would need, this is the manpower I would do, this is the other cost which I would incur. Now, when you have already planned for that and you are monitoring it, the hedging is not. So, and in your mind, you have again applied that conversion rate. Now, if that conversion rate, which in your Excel, when you have given that contract was 75, and if it becomes 74, that 1 rupee is the loss which is there. So
Yes.
hedging would help you to get that 75 as a rate. That is what critical. And it also depends how the money flow happens to you. Hedging, we would only give you a rate. And that rate has to be nearer to what you have assumed. Then only you would get the same percentage of profit. Hope I am able to answer, and Anand can give you various products. But that is very critical in your Excel when you are planning to get nearer to that rate which you have used to identify that gross profit margin when you have quoted the contract.
Yes, I think you have. So there is just one question, I think.
So Uma, just to add to Amit, one important factor for typically our audience is by hedging, they are also receiving the forward premium. So effectively that 3% or 4%, what is the forward premium, it is getting added to their cash flows. So if your expenses are in INR and if you have received a project order and your expenses are certain, it is always better to hedge the receivables also, so that your receivables are in INR, expenses are in INR, and you are not open to market. And along with that, as a byproduct, because you are an exporter, you are also
so there's one more question from Sri Anand. Do you expect Fed tapering will increase the USD INR index by a large margin?
So yeah, so I'll take that. So yeah, so Fed tapering has already more or less been priced in. So the kind of forecast that I provided, so as far as the dollar index, one is the DXY, we see it going to 95. So it's currently around 92.40, 92.50. We see it going around 95 levels by the end of this year and early next year. Euro and JPY will probably depreciate. As far as USD INR is concerned, yes. So the kind of ranges that I've provided, where I've said that there is a 74.50, 76.50 in the second half of this fiscal year, takes into account the Fed normalizing policy. Few things to keep in mind is that, again, people typically compare the 2013 episode to the current episode. One is, the messaging was pretty off in 2013 from the Fed. They didn't communicate their message properly. This time around, it's well communicated and expected. And don't forget that last time the Fed tapered was the first time the markets were exposed to a Fed tapering. We already had Fed tapering, deliver quantitative tightening. So it may not be as extreme as what one saw in 2013, but definitely the trading range will be higher. It will go up maybe by a rupee, gradually, 1 rupee, 1 rupee 50 paisa, gradually over the next 6 months or so, which is what the forecasts are trying to indicate to us. Yeah.
Thanks, Shivam. I hope it answers your question. There is one more. You already answered that. I think any idea what the tapering is likely?
So, it will be anywhere. So the initial taper may not be as aggressive. It will be anywhere between 10 to 15 billion per month for the first 2-3 months, and then it will keep increasing by about 5 to 10 billion increments. We suspect that by August to September 22, QE will get bound out completely. If inflation pressures are more persistent, then the Fed has to prepare for a rate hiking cycle. So that's the kind. First increment 10 to 15, it will probably be more skewed towards mortgage-backed securities, and then gradually it will include treasury securities. Yeah. A little later on.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. So I just want to tell all the panelists that, not the panelists, the audience, that if you have any queries, you can write to ssmishra@nascom.in. The chat box has it, and I think they will be able to route you through the right people here at ICICI if you have any further questions as well. Wait, I can see something else. No, I think that's all. Let me just check. Yeah, those are all the questions here. I think we will, if you don't find any more questions, we can stop the session just now. But before that, I want to give a big round of applause to all of you for making it an extremely interactive and fruitful session. Personally, I did not know much about this, and I think we got a lot of useful insights. I think all our members will agree. And it's a big round of applause to both ICICI Bank and NASSCOM. This being the first of the series in this year, and there are more to come. So just watch out for this space. And there'll be more such regular interactions under the SME advantage program. So let's all take advantage of this and use this to our advantage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Uma. I'm sure I represent everyone here when I express my immense gratitude to our panelists for delivering such an insightful session. Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank our audience for taking out time from their busy schedule to join us. We hope you enjoyed it and found it beneficial. As Uma mentioned, for any further queries and for the session recording, please reach out to my colleague Saurav here. His email ID has been shared in the chat section. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Rohit, Shivam, and Anand. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.